Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 9th, 2019 meeting of the Glendale City Council. May we have roll call, please?
Council members Agajanian.
Present.
Devine.
Here.
Carpetian.
Here.
Sinanian. Here. Mayor Najarian.
Here. Council Member Agajania, would you please lead us in the flag salute?
Please join me in the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for the invocation, which will be delivered this evening by Pastor Michael Kingdom, Center Valley Filipino Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Let us pray. Eternal God and compassionate Creator, we come before you this evening full of gratitude in our hearts for this great opportunity to serve you as well as one another in this meeting tonight. We pray for a special blessing upon our council members this evening. We pray that you'll bless them with wisdom and understanding as they address the different individual and collective concerns of all who have come this evening. We pray for all those who have come tonight to share their needs, and we pray that their voices will be heard and that ultimately you will guide all of us to a solution. We also pray for the spirit of mutuality and respect. And we also pray for a special blessing upon all of our citizens and law enforcement here in the city of Glendale. And most of all, we pray that tonight's meeting will bring us one step closer to a more prosperous and greater city of Glendale. We pray this in your most holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Mr. Clerk, may we have the report?
The agenda for the April 9, 2019 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council was posted on Friday, April 5th, 2019 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. And the next item?
Next item is agenda preview for the meetings of Tuesday, April 16, 2019 under 3A.
Mr. Golanian.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. For April 16, 2019, there are no agendized items for the Glendale Housing Authority. We do, however, have a joint meeting of Glendale City Council and Glendale Financing Authority on that date, commencing at 3 p.m. A report from the Finance Department regarding approval of a conflict of interest code for the Glendale Municipal Financing Authority, approval of issuance of lease revenue bonds to refinance the city's 2000 variable rate certificate of participation, first reading of ordinance authorizing leases with the Glendale Municipal Financing Authority, and approval of a continuing disclosure compliance policy. In the same afternoon, we also have a special meeting of the Glendale City Council. Report from Director of Community Development regarding Central Park Block final schematic design. On the same day, April 16, 2019, commencing at 6 p.m., in the Glendale City Council, we have 4 consent items, all from Public Works Department. First one being regarding advertisements for bids for Verdugo Boulevard Rehabilitation Project, followed by advertisements for Highland Avenue Rehabilitation Project, another report from Public Works Department regarding adoption of fiscal year 1920 SB1 project list, finally Public Works regarding contract award for the City Clerk City Hall renovation project. Under adoption of ordinances, ordinance for adoption amending titles 2, 15, and 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code 1995 relating to deterring the unpermitted demolition of historic resources and including minor changes and clarification of other code sections. Code amendment case number 18-23357. Under action items, report from the police chief regarding police department in-car video replacement, followed by fire chief regarding Oakmont Country Club 4th of July fireworks display approval, followed by Public Works Department regarding introduction of ordinance amending Chapter 8.58 of Title 8 of Glendale Municipal Code 2017 related to construction and demolition debris diversion program. And that concludes my report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Galanian. I believe that we will take item 3C ahead of 3B, Mr. Clerk, if you'll read that.
3C is a proclamation designating April 7th through the 13th, 2019 as National Library Week.
Okay. All the library fans, please come forward while I read this proclamation. We have our head of libraries here and his loyal staffers.
We have a few fans with us tonight.
Okay, very good. Wow. Yeah. You are not kidding. There you go. Come on up.
And of course, if anyone else supports libraries, they could stand with us, but they might want to stay in their seat.
I guess the reports of the death of libraries were premature, to quote Mark Twain. Well, here we go, all you library fans. Whereas the Library Arts and Culture Department will join libraries around the United States to celebrate National Library Week, April 7th to 13th, 2019. And whereas April 7th to 13th, 2019 is also Fine Free Week, when Glendale Library cardholders can return overdue Glendale materials to any Glendale Library Arts and Culture location and have any associates' fines on their items waived. And whereas National Library Workers' Day on April 9, 2019 recognizes the unique contributions that library workers make, such as 40-year employee Thea Van Houten. 40 years. Goodness gracious. This is about you, Thea. As 40-year employee Thea Van Houten. And you help people find the information they need for learning, working, as well as for recreational purposes. And whereas Library Giving Day on April 10th, 2019 is an excellent time to make a financial contribution to support your favorite Glendale Library location. And whereas Glendale Federal Credit Union has for 12 years, that's your cue, Glendale Federal Credit Union has for 12 years supported the spirit of Library Giving Day by underwriting memberships, including last year's 700 memberships, which equates to just under $10,000 for the Friends of the Glendale Public Library. And whereas Library Volunteer Recognition Day, volunteer, is April 11th, 2019, when we pause to celebrate the power of all the volunteers who serve our libraries in a myriad of ways, including, but not limited to, our adult literacy tutors, the Glendale Library Foundation, the Friends of the Glendale Public Library, and the Brand Associates to improve our community. And therefore, I, R. Najarian, Mayor of Glendale, proclaim April 7th to 13th, 2019 as National Library Week in Glendale, California, and invite residents to visit all of our library arts and culture locations, including the recently reimagined Grandview Library. And I also invite them to return all overdue Glendale library materials to any library arts and culture location, fine-free. National Library Work, signed, R. Najarian. Congratulations.
And Mr. Mayor, if you'll indulge me, we hope to go ahead.
I'm going to ask my colleague, Ms. Devine, who is good friends with Thea Van Houten, to present this not just to her, but to the entire group.
Congratulations, 40 years, and still going strong, right? Yes. Still going strong. Thank you all very much.
Turn around and do a photo. And then, Thea, if you could hold that. And then we also have a gift for the Glendale Federal Credit Union, which is actually a stone, if I might read it. It's with grateful appreciation to Glendale Federal Credit Union for its support of the Friends of the Glendale Public Library in 2019. Of course, they've been doing that for over 12 years. And this is a stone that will be placed on the library, the Friends of the Library tree, which is across from the auditorium. So, but you can hold that for the photo. It's very heavy.
Is that what we're doing?
Yes.
Oh.
Wait, we got one more
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And
Thank you
City
very
Council
much.
members.
Thank
We
you, everyone.
Appreciate you.
We love our libraries.
Yes, we do.
Thea said she couldn't do it without everyone else that's here. So.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, let's go to 3B.
3B is a presentation, Metro Bus Rapid Transit Update.
Good evening. Oh, there we go. Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Swift, and I'm Metro's primary liaison to the City of Glendale in the Office of Local Government and External Affairs at Metro. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council members, for this opportunity to come to you tonight. I'm here to present on, well, we have a number of very exciting projects at Metro for the residents of Glendale to improve mobility options. But tonight I'm joined by my colleagues from Countywide Planning to give you an update on the North Hollywood to Pasadena Bus Rapid Transit Project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura Cornejo, our Deputy Executive Officer in Countywide Planning.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Thank you again for inviting us to be here this evening. Scott Hartwell, Project Manager, will walk you through the presentation, but I wanted to take a moment to thank you for your continued involvement on this project. As Scott will explain, we are very early on in our planning process, which makes your involvement so very important because all the comments we receive from you, from your community members, the questions, the concerns, how you envision the BRT project integrating with your community, all of that helps inform the next project phase where we will evaluate and do more studies as we move forward. So as Scott runs through the presentation, please think about what questions and how you want to see this BRT contribute to your community. Again, we're early on in the process, decisions have not been made, and so we look forward to having you continue to work with us to bringing this project to the City of Glendale. And with that, I'll ask Scott to come up. Thank you.
Good evening. So as Laura mentioned, my name is Scott Hartwell. I am the project manager for the North Hollywood to Pasadena BRT project. Thank you for allowing us a few minutes here tonight to talk about this project. I'll get started with just a little bit of project background. So this is a Measure M funded project. It is funded with $267 million in Measure M and SB1 funds. And the project has an opening date per Measure M, an opening date range of between fiscal years 2022 and 2024. So these are the upcoming planning milestones that we have. As Laura mentioned, we are still early in the planning process. We are now wrapping up an alternatives analysis that followed an extensive public outreach effort. And we intend to go to our board this month to ask our board to advance the project into the environmental phase. And if the board approves this request, we will begin we will release a notice of preparation and begin public scoping in May, hold public scoping meetings through early June, which will be another opportunity for public comment. And then in the spring of 2020, we will release a draft EIR for another formal public comment, and then release a final in 2020, and at that point, the board would certify the final EIR and make a final decision regarding the project. And throughout this process, we will be collaborating not only with the city of Glendale and the other corridor cities, but with the residents and various stakeholders within the corridor. So I'll just quickly go through what is BRT. BRT has long been characterized as light rail on rubber tires, and the reason for that is it offers many of the same benefits as light rail, but can be done at a fraction of the cost. Now, this is just a conceptual rendering of what a BRT station could look like. It shows many of the features often associated with BRT and BRT stations that really make them function more like a light rail as opposed to a regular bus. So you see large canopies, other features and amenities for passengers like off-vehicle fare payment, where you pay your fare before you get on the bus to facilitate fast boarding. And from a speed standpoint, the buses are designed to really move people quickly between key activity centers, which can be accomplished through a number of such features as dedicated bus lanes, so the buses are separated from traffic, limited stops. An existing bus might stop every block or 2 blocks. A service like this would stop more like a train every half mile to a mile. High frequencies, as well as other features like digital displays that tell you when your next bus will be arriving, features like that that enhance the customer experience. So I won't go through all these elements. I've already touched on a lot of them, but these are some of the common BRT elements. One thing I'd like to emphasize is that this service stands apart from a regular bus service. When people see these buses and these stations, which really stand out, they know right away this is a premium transit service. So these are some examples of BRT stations. As you can see in each of them, you see the large canopies, the rail-like platforms, some of the other amenities like seating, and the off-vehicle fare payment that I mentioned. Some examples of BRT running ways or dedicated bus lanes. In the upper left-hand corner is an example of a center-running BRT. This is the Omnitrans service that operates in San Bernardino. On the right is an example of our Wilshire BRT service. It operates in a curb-running lane during peak periods. So during rush hour, during peak periods, only the buses have access to the curb-running lane. And then in the bottom left is an example of the Metro Silver Line, which is a BRT operating on the freeway. And one of the nice things about BRT is the flexibility in terms of the types of elements that we implement. And so you take dedicated bus lanes, for example. We know that they can be challenging to implement along the corridor, and there are some segments where maybe the right-of-way isn't wide enough to accommodate dedicated bus lanes or the impacts are too great. So we could operate in mixed-flow traffic in some of those segments and still achieve travel time savings compared to regular buses through such features as the signal priority and the limited stop spacing. We did embark on a community outreach effort this past fall where we started with several alignment concepts that had come out of a prior technical study. And through that process, we whittled down some of the different alignments into a more manageable range of potential alternatives. We held several community meetings. We had a presence at several neighborhood events, and we briefed several stakeholders, including business groups. Some of the key priorities that we heard coming out of the various communities, including in Glendale, included the need for frequent, reliable service with good first, last mile connections. So we received a lot of questions and comments about the need for good pedestrian and bicycle access to the stations. Also the need for strong connectivity to businesses, destinations, as well as to existing transit services, and also the need for convenient stations that are safe and easy to access. So additionally, what we heard in Glendale, there was support for the project, and there was preference expressed by community members for a street running alternative as opposed to operating on the freeway. So you take, for instance, our existing Line 501, which is an express service that operates from North Hollywood to Pasadena and goes right through Glendale. A service like that does have a faster end-to-end travel time than a street-running alternative of a BRT might, but the downside is you miss a lot of the key destinations along the way, and your connectivity within the corridor just isn't as strong. You don't have as many stations as you would for a street-running alternative. Not to mention that a lot of the comments we heard related to the difficulty and the lack of desirability of stations that are adjacent to freeways, which can be generally unpleasant. So because of that, I think there was a lot of preference for serving the areas south of the 134, which could be done with the street running alternative, and going down either Brand or Central, and I'll get into the routes in just a minute. But we did meet with several business stakeholders, including the Downtown Glendale Association, Chamber of Commerce. We met with representatives of the 2 malls, including the Americana and the Galleria, and actually had a meeting today with Steven Sayers of the Galleria, and they were both very optimistic about the project and thought it would increase access to the malls for employees and for potential shoppers. And from there, there was also desire to continue east on the street, either via Broadway or Colorado, to continue on towards Pasadena, and then support to go up Glen Oaks to connect to Burbank. So some of the key community questions and concerns we heard, again, throughout the corridor, but also here within Glendale, included environmental impact concerns. What will the traffic impacts be of implementing a service like this? What will the parking impacts be? We heard questions about station beautification. What will the project look like out on the street? What will the stations look like? And also the need to preserve community character. We received questions about project funding. How much will the project cost? What are the funding sources? How secure are the funding sources? And then implications for existing transit services like the 501, as I mentioned, and also lines like the 780, which is a rapid service that overlaps a bit with some of our potential project routes, and just making sure we maintain the access that's provided by those existing services, which we will. So that takes us to our refined street running alternative with route options that came out of our technical analysis as well as the community feedback we received. I'll zoom in on the Glendale portion in just a minute, but just to give you an overview, this is an 18-mile long corridor stretching from North Hollywood at the Metro Red Orange Line station, and then would go through 4 cities, including the city of LA, Burbank, Glendale, on the way to Pasadena. So where you see purple lines are where we have really just one route, one refined route to get through a particular segment of the corridor. And where you see pink lines are where we have multiple route options. These are different options that we're still considering to get through particular segments. We are neutral on these route options. We don't have a preference for any one, and we intend to take them all forward for further study in the environmental phase. So zooming in on Glendale, the BRT would come from downtown Burbank, going down Glen Oaks, and from there, there's a few different options. One would involve hopping on the freeway for a short segment on the 134, and then getting off again and then feeding into Eagle Rock. Now, the advantage to this segment is it would have a faster travel time, and in addition to that, you would avoid some of the potential impacts that you would have operating on the street. Now, the downside is you bypass all the destinations south of the 134, including the malls, including the new Armenian American Museum, which our other 2 potential route options would serve very well. And so the other 2 options involve heading south on Central, and then serving the malls right in the middle there. And then from there, we could either head east on Broadway, where we have a lot of existing service, or head a little bit further south and serve Colorado, heading east that way. So we do have some preliminary ridership estimates, and the estimate is up to 30,000 daily boardings by the year 2042. Now, these numbers are subject to refinement as the station locations are refined, as well as the different route options. So some of the benefits that we envision for Glendale include creating this new mobility option and really creating an appealing rail-like alternative that can get people out of their cars, give them, as I said, a new option to really access key activity centers and where they need to go, including major shopping centers, employment centers. And one of the benefits also is we will be improving air quality. So as I mentioned, we have new buses that will be part of this project that will really stand out. And as part of that, Metro is transitioning to a zero-emission bus fleet over the next 10 or 12 years. And these buses and this line will be prioritized for those electric buses, which will not only have that air quality benefit, but a noise benefit as well, because the buses will be quieter and they'll be a smoother ride as opposed to the current buses that we operate. We will also look to implement streetscape enhancements around the stations, which goes back to some of the first last mile comments we heard from the community. Some opportunities that we see for Glendale include augmenting other transit services and regional transit options. One benefit we see for this project is that other transit services like the Glendale B line could share the dedicated bus lanes, which would be a benefit to those riders as well. And also complement the city's future transportation infrastructure projects, including the planned streetcar, which we know is a very important project for the city of Glendale. We have been meeting regularly with city staff to coordinate that project and make sure the 2 projects, as they move forward in their planning stages, complement one another. We will also complement connections to the Hollywood Burbank Airport, which we recognize as a regionally significant asset for the corridor. And also, we have been coordinating with Metro Regional Rail on the LA Glendale Burbank feasibility study, which, as I'm sure you know, is looking at improved transit service along the Metrolink right-of-way. So the environmental study, as I mentioned, is the next phase, and we will be going to our board, as I said, this month to ask to advance the project and the various route options into the EIR phase. And from there, we'll really have a chance to really look into the potential impacts of implementing the various project components related to traffic and parking, as well as identifying mitigation measures that can help offset those impacts, replace lost parking, and help mitigate traffic impacts. And in addition to that, we'll have refined cost estimates, ridership estimates, as well as travel time savings estimates. And again, as I mentioned, we will continue to solicit feedback from the city as well as the public. And we would love to have any feedback you have now and hear any questions you might have. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Scott. And just so we're clear, we're still quite a ways away from determining any sort of route. Those will be analyzed in the environmental document where the details of parking interruptions, traffic flows, and everything else that goes into an EIR process.
Absolutely.
But we love to give input here in Glendale, and let me open it up to my colleagues for their comments. Mr. Garbettian.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is, I think we had one presentation regarding the same project 3 years ago. It was in the hospital, if I'm not mistaken. And this is the same project, basically? Is it give and take the same thing? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't have a solid opinion about it one way or the other. The only concerns, of course, I know you had a community meeting by saying that the community is for it. I think it's kind of early for that kind of a decision. But I think my concerns overall will be if it's a dedicated lane, Broadway and Colorado, or even Central. I don't know how it would be. I think it would just jam pack our traffic. And if it's a lane, I noticed that you mentioned it's a curb lane, so if it's only being used on rush hours. I think LA has one or two of these, and every time I go to downtown LA and there is a lane that shows it's for the buses. By the time I figure out it's from 4 to 6 or it's the entire day, it's kind of confusing. I enter there, I say, oh, I have to make a U-turn and come out. But do you have, I think what we need to get is a report as to what is the ridership on the current metro lanes that we have right now on Broadway, on Colorado, and this is going to be on top of that, because I know we have some services from Metro on buses. Mr. Najarian knows more, but I believe we need to look at those as well, because I know across the street, Glendale Avenue and Broadway is a major hub, and we have Metro over there as well. It's heavily used. And the EIR will consider both options, the freeway stop and as well as the street stops, or how would that work?
Yes. We'll take all the different route options into the EIR phase, and with that, we'll study potential stop locations. The freeway route would likely have a couple of stops at each end of that particular segment.
Okay. And also, this is not going to, when I saw that I don't have the route that you showed, the major route, it doesn't go to Burbank Airport, right? It just turns on Olive and goes south? Am I correct?
Yeah, so the line of thinking for the particular route going through Burbank, and what we heard, especially in that community, was the desire to connect both downtown Burbank and the Burbank Media District. So that's why the line sort of zigzags up and then back down. It connects to the Burbank Media District and then would continue on the 134 for a short segment and then go up towards North Hollywood, where it would terminate at the North Hollywood station.
Okay. I think one of the things maybe the EIR can take a look at or can be studied is if the same route can connect to Burbank Airport versus Olive Avenue. It's just an opinion, because if I want to take a public transportation and go to Burbank Airport, I may take that bus, which is quicker to get to the airport than going all the way down to the train station and take the train station and go back to, it's just going a zigzag if I want to take the train. But if it's a bus that connects to Burbank Airport, it would be much easier. And also, I don't know if we have, I think what else, something else that needs to be considered is the route for the streetcar. Is it going to be Central Avenue or is it going to be Brand? We don't know yet. Is it going to come up San Fernando through Cypress to South Brand and come up, or is it going to continue on San Fernando, get on Broadway, not Broadway, get on Colorado and go north on Central? So if you have streetcar on Central and BRT on Central, I don't know. I think these are the things that we need to consider to maybe combine these two projects and see which one will make more sense. That's all I have at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your report. So thanks for the report. I like the ridership numbers, but I think you said 30,000 by year 2042.
Yeah, that's the modeling horizon
Okay.
here. Yeah.
And I'm looking at the planning milestones. I mean, assuming everything goes ideally in terms of timing, just no impediments, no problems. When the time comes for the money to appear, it magically just appears from Measure M. Assuming all that, what's the best case scenario start date for this project? I don't mean groundbreaking, I mean ridership date.
I'm sorry, you mean opening date?
I mean, yeah, the day when we can actually have a
Revenue
bus.
service.
A bus,
Revenue service,
yeah,
yeah.
revenue service day.
2024, mid-2024.
All right, so that 2042 doesn't mean that it's going to be.
No, and eventually we will have an estimate for an opening day ridership number. We don't have that at this time, but we will.
And I know that part of the studies actually looks at the amount of money that's going to be required for this project, but do we have a rough estimate? Are we in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billion? I mean, I know it's not a billion, but do we have a rough estimate?
The project cost?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're working through that now as part of our alternatives analysis. The costs do range considerably based on the type of amenities that you implement. We do, based on our estimates now, see that we can build the basic amenities that I outlined for the cost that or for the funding amount that we have for the $267 million. There's a lot of contingencies built into the cost estimates. They're still very rough and need to be refined, and they will be as we work through each of the alternatives.
Okay, and that money, $267 million, I know that it sort of, in theory, it comes from Measure M, but that money, I assume, doesn't exist today. It's not sitting in some bank account and it's designated, Glendale's BRT project, right? So what's the mechanics behind that? Is there a line item that's going to appear on the agenda for the Metro to vote on at some point, and they're going to vote on it, and you're going to start looking for the money from bank accounts? I mean, how does that work?
Well, Measure M did identify this particular project for that money, so the money is there. Beyond that, if you'd like to hear specific mechanics, I could defer to Laura Cornejo, who could speak a little bit more about that if you'd like.
Okay, thanks.
So as Scott mentioned, in Measure M, we did identify the funding, and as part of our expenditure plan, the funding sources have been identified. When we return to the board at the end of the environmental process, we will also have identified all those different funding sources to show the board that we have the funding in place in order to be able to move on into the next phase and to go into operations. And so that will be part of what we demonstrate when we go to the board.
Okay, so in other words, it exists as a budgetary item in the future, but when the time comes, you'll actually go and say, this is where the money's going to come from, and Metro will vote on it, and then the money will start accumulating, or?
Correct. So per Measure M, there's a date when the funding becomes available for construction and when it becomes available to go into operation. And so based on that, that timeline, the funding has been identified and essentially lined up so that when this project gets completed, the funding is there. When we go to the board, we have to demonstrate that that funding is ready to be expended, and so that will be part of what the board takes action on.
Okay, thank you, Laura. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All
Ms.
right.
Devine?
I have a couple of comments. One question, explain signal priority. I mean, does that mean like a left turn, right turn, or how does signal priority work with buses?
So on a high level, there's usually a transponder on the bus itself. So as the bus approaches the signal, it triggers a green light. It might extend a green phase. or it might reduce a red light phase. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to catch every green light and then all the lights will be green, but it does mean you'll catch more green lights and you'll spend less time at red lights.
All right, so you have more cars following these buses, won't we?
Maybe.
The fast lane, the fast lane. And two comments. First of all, I think it's really important to integrate the streetcar plans and this plan so to prevent redundancy. You know, we don't want everything going in the same direction, the same. And the second thing is, as Councilmember Garpetian mentioned, I think having it go to the Burbank Airport is really important because right now we have train service there, but of course it stops 1 mile from the airport. And so more transportation has to be provided to get people from the train to the airport. So I think if we had transportation that really did take, you know, residents and travelers to the airport, it would be much better. So those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Agajanian?
Just have one question. Continue to solicit feedback from Glendale and the public. When that's going to happen?
So, as I mentioned, we did already start a big public outreach effort as we got ready to get going with the alternatives analysis. That included several different alignment concepts, a lot more than what I showed you that came out of our prior technical study. So through that effort, we did meet with several stakeholders. We did hold community meetings. We do have several forums where people could provide comments electronically to Metro. And so as we move forward into the next phase, there'll be additional public comment opportunities, both formal and informal, including the scoping period, scoping meetings, which we invite all of you and your residents to attend, and then through the draft EIR period and releasing the draft EIR for public comment. And we'd be happy to come back to the council and any other stakeholders that maybe we missed that you think we should hit on our way as we go through.
Ms. Devine?
I have another question about the electric buses. And I think you mentioned in your presentation 10 to 20 years. Why not, are electric buses not in the budget right now currently, or?
10 to 12 years.
10 to 12 years.
Yes, I believe by 2030, Metro has a goal to be 100% zero emission. And the first buses are in the process of being delivered right now for the Orange Line.
Is that because there are so many of them that have to be replaced? That
Yeah,
it's going
we
to
have
take that
thousands of
long?
buses in our fleet. It takes a
Pardon?
while. Yeah, we have thousands of buses, so it takes
Oh,
a
I
while.
see. Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Garpetian?
Yes, a couple of more questions. I heard that parts of LA, they want to have these gates coming down when they're going through intersections like the trains have, so they can stop every other traffic in order for the bus to travel faster. I want to know if that's going to be part of this project. Also, you mentioned that you spoke to Downtown Merchant Association or Downtown DGA, which is a great thing, but I believe we need to contact most of the businesses on Colorado Boulevard and Broadway, because they will be more affected by these, and let them know that it's coming and get some feedback from them as well, because these businesses are very small. Some of them don't have parking, and the only parking they have is in front of their basically stores or shops. One last question is the timing. I remember vaguely, I think it was like 78 minutes or 87 minutes coming from North Hollywood all the way down to Pasadena. Is that true? The length of this, if you get on the bus from North Hollywood, by the time you get to Pasadena, South Pasadena, is it South Pass? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Pasadena. Pasadena City College is the eastern
Pasadena
terminus
City
right
College.
now, based on
Right.
the route options. But
So what is the time? How long does it take for you to get from North Hollywood through this rapid bus transit to Pasadena?
So it's ultimately going to depend on the number of elements we're able to implement, including the number of dedicated bus lanes we're able to get. For example, that'll have a big, that'll be a big determining factor in terms of the speed. Our preliminary travel time end to end right now is estimated to be about an hour, maybe just over an hour. And again, that's subject to refinement as we move forward. And to answer your question about the gates, that's part of the Orange Line Improvements Project, where the crossing gates are coming down. Now, the key difference between that project and our project is that operates in its own exclusive Metro-owned right-of-way, whereas we will be on city streets, so we won't be looking at a gating system for this.
And I have one more question. I'll ask you when I remember. I lost my throat.
Okay. I'm very happy that we've got this far on the project. It wasn't an easy lift at Metro. I remember I had to sell this to Zev Yaroslavsky and tell him it was an extension of his Orange Line, and at the same time sell it to Mike Antonovich and tell him that it was an extension of his Gold Line coming from the east. And this is what we're with. I'm glad that it was placed as a priority in Measure M. We are going to have the funding. I wish we could say the same for our streetcar project, but let's be grateful for this funding. I'm very happy that we're going to be going electric, because everybody knows even natural gas causes pollution. Even though Metro's fleet was one of the first in the country running on all natural gas, we found something even cleaner, and that's with the electric vehicles. I'm hoping that we can even piggyback on some of the Orange Line success with their conversion to electric vehicles. They hopefully will work out the bugs on the charging methods, and we could get some of those soon. What this does, if we can you go back to your regional map? Yeah. So what this line will do is to connect the two great valleys in Los Angeles, the San Fernando Valley and the San Gabriel Valley, and of course Glendale is smack in the middle. It not only gives those commuters who want to travel from one valley to the other a much easier way, but it gives the folks in Glendale who are in the middle there a great chance of either going west, grab the Orange Line if you want to go deep into the valley, or the Red Line if you want to go to Hollywood and then to Union Station, or if you want to go east, there's Pasadena through South Pass and Glassell Park and et cetera, also ending up at Union Station. So it really is connecting the two great valleys. As far as the Burbank Airport connection goes, that's a tough call for Burbank, and I've spoken to the Burbank council people. They can choose one. Do you want to go through the media district, or do you want to go through the airport? And that's, we have to give some deference to them. I think connecting to the airport would be a great connection, but I know they're interested in hitting, at that right angle there, you're going through the downtown area, their civic center area, and then they're making that sharp left turn to hit the media district. So they have to think long and hard, and I'm not sure if that's their decision at this point. That I don't see any alternative for them, but that was their call. I'm not sure. Although they come to our city council meetings and tell us what to do with the horse properties and all that other. I'm not sure the power plants and all that. I'm not sure how hard we should press that upon them. So I think it's great. I initially was one who felt the freeway route was the only route and the best route, but I decided you can't make such decisions without a full understanding of the impacts. So I've sort of backed off that, and I'm willing to understand some of the impacts that it would have on Colorado Boulevard and some of the benefits as well. So I think speaking to the property owners and business owners along Colorado or Broadway would be very beneficial. They might be gangbusters for it. They might think this is going to bring all sorts of patrons, and they'll be willing to put up with losing some parking in front. Or they might say, heck no, we don't want it, just to get a feeling as to where they are on that. So I look forward to some of the results of that community input. And then the EIR, of course, will work out some of the more minute details on the impacts. So I appreciate you coming forward and all the Metro staff.
I remember.
Did you
my
remember?
question,
Okay,
yes.
Mr. Garpetian.
Sorry, I had what was that politician who forgot what he wanted to say. There was this
Donald Trump.
No, presidential debate. Anyways, 30,000 passengers by 2042. How many trips would it take to move 30,000? How many buses? Each bus is what? How many people fit in? What's the capacity of the buses?
So the exact capacity, Martha, do you know the exact capacity for 40-footer?
But these will be articulated, right? These aren't going to be
Not sure yet.
40-footers.
Yeah, they could be 40
They could be
footers.
40.
Yeah, they could be 40.
Okay, so you have to address this from the dot, but you said they could be articulated, which would seat
Closer to 80.
closer to 80.
Yeah, and so we still are working out the size of the buses, and I think as we refine our ridership statistics, especially with projected opening day ridership statistics, that'll give us a better idea as to what capacity we need for our buses. And we're still estimating the number of buses we'll need on the route at one time to handle those passengers. But I mean, that's something that will be worked out in short order.
So if you have, I'm just trying to understand how the traffic would be. If you have 30,000 passengers and there are 50 in each bus, it will take 600 buses to move 30,000 people around. If it's 50 on each bus all the time, if you have it packed, every time you have, every bus is full by 50 people, it will take 600 trips basically to move 30,000 people around from one location to another.
Well, I mean, the way
ridership, I'm sorry, let me ask you this, and I think this is my last question. Is the ridership, the 30,000 only in Glendale portion or the entire?
No, that's the entire corridor.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Just a quick question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
The 30,000 is it's a good number, right? It shows very high ridership.
That is a strong number, and that's the up to. I mean, that's the high
It's
end.
the opposite, I see.
So, thank you very much, but let's be clear, if we had a vote today, everyone on council would vote for light rail for this. But I think we do have to appreciate the speed and the financial feasibility and efficiency of a BRT, which was originally put into use in a South American country, if I'm not, was it Colombia? In Colombia. And the Orange Line, when it first opened, was poo-pooed. No one thought that it would have any sort of ridership, and who's going to get on this bus? It's not really a light rail. Who are you fooling? But it has incredible ridership figures now for a stretch of almost the same length, if I'm not mistaken, the one that goes deep into the valley. So all this remains to be seen. We're happy to work with you. We've got a community and a council that is very much interested in bringing the best possible transportation project with the cards that we've been dealt. And please keep us posted. And if you have any questions, we've got our city manager, and we've got a new public works staff, and we're all available individually or collectively before council for input and meetings. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Were there any cards on this item? No. All right. Thank you, Metro staff. Are you leaving now, or are you sticking around for the streetcar study? No. Are you presenting the streetcar study? No. Oh, the city is. Okay. No, you guys, you're dismissed if you so choose. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Next item.
Next item is consent items, including minutes, following a routine and may be acted upon by one motion. Excuse me. Any member of council or the audience requesting separate consideration may do so by making such request before a motion is proposed.
Do I have a motion for the consent calendar?
If there are no questions or comments, I move the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
Second,
Roll call, please.
Councilmembers Agajanian?
Yes.
Devine?
yes.
Garpetian?
Yes.
Sinanian? Yes. Mayor Najjar.
Yes. Next item.
Next item is city council and staff comments.
Mr. Sinanian.
I don't have any, you have one comment. I believe this is yours, Mr. Mayor.
These are my swim goggles from a few elections ago. We may need them again, though.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I have no
Mr.
comments.
Garpetian. Ms. Devine?
Well, we had, thank you, we had some really extraordinary events this past week. First off was the second annual Armenian Genocide event organized by the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, which dealt with transgenerational effects and healing from the genocide. It was absolutely fantastic. It was, thank you, Elizabeth Gregorian at the library for putting this together. It was a huge turnout, psychologists speaking to the people that were there, and it didn't matter if you were Armenian, non-Armenian. What the psychologists talked about, the effects and the healing after painful experiences was actually the same for everyone. So I hope that, look forward to the third year of this event. It's presented at the library. We also all had the opportunity to meet the First Lady of Armenia, Anna Hagobian, a fabulous, very bright woman who has the women at heart and supporting women. She's starting programs in the country for women and children, and she gave us a kind of a synopsis of the the plan for the country, and it was full of hope and a positivity. So it was quite an amazing opportunity, I think, for all of us to meet with her. And then I have a question for, I guess it's Mr. Galanian or Mr. Lanzafame, one or two. I received an email from a resident, and this was about the trees that the city plants in the parkways. And I guess some of the trees in her neighborhood have died, and her question is, who's responsible for these trees that the city plants in the parkways? Are the residents responsible for taking care of them, or is the city responsible? And what do we do if the residents, if they are responsible, what do we do if they don't take care of them? Mr. Galanian, I'm looking at you.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Mayor, Member of City Council, Councilmember Devine. When we do plant new trees in the parkway, we put them on a 90-day watering cycle. The city's maintenance crews water them for 90 days. And after the 90 days, they turn it over, and it becomes the residents' or the property owner's responsibility to maintain them thereafter. And we do notify them before we turn it over to them. And if they don't, we haven't really enforced any ramifications upon the property owners. We do replace them, but we do remind them that they need to take care of them and water them regularly.
Is this something that's like complaint driven? Can they call in and say these people are not?
Yes, they can definitely call 818-548-3950. That's our maintenance services division.
Can you say that number again, please?
548-3950.
3950. And then will the city services go out and water them, or?
We will water them,
and tell the,
and yeah, we will contact the property owner to make sure that they will continue watering them and taking care of them.
great, okay. I hope everybody heard that out there. Take care of those trees. The second item that I wanted to bring up was concerning a topic that was mentioned at SCAG last Thursday. And it concerns the mobility revolution that we're going through right now. And it's occurring in transportation. And so what we have to talk about is preparation for electric vehicles. And I know, Mayor, you mentioned last week in your comments that you were interested in going forward with electric buses here in Glendale. With this transition, we have to think about vehicular automation. We have to think about electric vehicles, whether they're cars, trucks, buses, and the apps. And the question was, what should government do? What do we do about that, and how can we handle that? And so one of the things that was suggested was an EV readiness plan. And so I wanted to ask staff, Mrs. Beers, if we have a readiness plan dealing with charging infrastructure, for instance, requiring EV wiring, identifying public spaces where the infrastructure can be located, transitioning the municipal fleets, parking, zoning, and notifying the public about the advantages of electric vehicles. And I know that they were telling us that in 3 years, the number of electric vehicles being sold has tripled. And so I think we as a city and as a council, we have a responsibility to make sure that our city is EV ready. And the other question that goes along with this is concerning the maintenance facility. And I had asked when we were talking about that if there was going to be infrastructure in that building for EV vehicles. And I believe I was told no, not at this point, but I'm not sure. So if you can kind of address those, do we have a readiness plan, EV readiness plan? Will we have one? And the
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Devine, that the plan I think you're referring to is called the Southern California Plug-in Electric Vehicle Readiness Plan. That was put together by UCLA, which in and of itself makes it an outstanding report. And it was given to SCAG as what I will call is a lot of base information. So it talks in general about EVs. It talks about regional-wide distribution of multifamily, single-family homes. It talks about the different kind of chargers. It talks about how best, it indicates that the biggest bang for the buck initially is going to be residential. It talks about where the transit system is going to go. You heard today, Metro has got a 2030 goal for electric. I believe LADOT and Foothill Transit also have a 2030 goal. I'm sure, not to put words in my good friend Phil Lanzafaden's mouth, but the Beeline will be looking to in that direction as well. If you remember when we presented to you the IRP last December, we had in there load projections that were significantly higher than what we had showed you 4 years ago when we initially did the scoping study for Grayson. That was almost exclusively based on EV growth, and EV growth here in Glendale. Now, that CEC, California Energy Commission numbers and calculations, and we took those and the formulas that they use, it looks to me, and I didn't read the whole UCLA report, I trusted them.
Keep going, Mr. Zern. We got it.
we're getting it.
But I think that the answer to your question is yes. We don't have a single document that covers everything because, like I said, this is more partly informational, partly directional. But we've been working at this for some time. So we have an annual infrastructure upgrade plan. So chargers, we have budgeted up to 10 a year. They're not easy to put in, I will tell you, but we have identified first and foremost our facilities, parking structures. We have street level parking. Angle parking works best, so Brand and Honolulu are two areas we're looking at, the transportation center, certain library and park facilities, and so on. So we are looking at that. I think if you recall, not too long ago, I came and gave an EV report to council, kind of updating where we were at. Probably in not too long, I'll come back with another one since this growth is happening. And you're right, we belong to an organization called Veloz, which is strictly about EVs in the Los Angeles County area. January 18 to January 19 growth of EVs in this area, 13%. And it's grown at that rate pretty much annually for the last 3 years.
Do you ever, they also mentioned that they have a Clean Cities Coalition, and they have a tool, it's called Atlas, and any city can use it. It's technology for electrical, for information that they can give you for our city, our actual city, and say where all of the cars are located, the EV vehicles are located, where the best places for these, the infrastructure is. I mean, it gives you the whole plan of just our city. And I thought that sounded like a really good tool for our staff to maybe look into. It's called Atlas.
And we have, ma'am.
Great. Oh,
We have
good,
done that,
good.
yes.
Okay, and then the next thing is, thank you. The next thing is the maintenance facility.
Yes, Councilmember Devine, you are correct in remembering that we weren't able to put the infrastructure in place for electrified buses because they require different kind of mechanism, different kind of repairs, obviously. Now, the Beeline service is not ready, or I can't say in the near future we'll be ready for electrification, but when the time comes, can we convert the facility so that they can house, maintain, and operate these vehicles? Absolutely. But as it stands today, no, we don't have electrical.
So there you have your answers. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sargajani, did I ask you?
Since yesterday I was in downtown Los Angeles, they were honoring, City of Los Angeles actually honoring Ms. Anna Hakopian, wife of Armenia's Prime Minister. City Council member Paul Krikorian, Paul Koretz, and Mike O'Farrell were there. And I was representing City of Glendale by myself. Nobody was there except me. So, and of course, your parents were there. So together, we joined to, present City of Glendale. Anyway, that was nice ceremony. They honored Ms. Anna Hakopian, and I was there.
Thank you. Thank you for representing. Mr. Carpenter.
Yes. Couple of things. As far as these are really good ideas that Ms. Devine mentioned about being ready for electric vehicles and everything else. I think that's part of our IRP and the future plan that is coming very soon, hopefully. The sustainability plan that we have, and the plan that we have for the entire city, for every building to have solar panels if we can. I think we're going to look at this like a regional issue and the city to be part of it. And some of these electric vehicles, like with Teslas, there are special centers that they take their cars to repair. Even the bodies, because they're one piece, I believe, or they're fiberglass, not every body shop can maintain it or sustain it. So it's a very specific, specialized firms that they work on these electric vehicles. And Mr. Agajanian mentioned Ms. Hakopian, Anna Hakopian, who came from Armenia and visited Southern California. We also had an event for her last night here. We honored her in Alex Theater. Also, we honored her Sunday night at the Hilton, which was done by the Consul General of Armenia, and also the Armenian American Medical Society had an event for her last Friday night that we all attended. Most of us were there, and the Hilton event, we were all there as well. And it was a great event. It was an honor to meet her and get to know her. She's very down to earth, and she comes across very sincere, and she speaks from heart, and you enjoy just listening to her. So thank you for mentioning that, because, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Sinanian.
Okay, since we're going down this lane, I did want to agree with Councilmember Devine that the event on Saturday morning, organized by the Department of Mental Health, the LA County Department of Mental Health, was very nice. It was actually very powerful. The speakers spoke to the broader mental health issues coming from traumatic experiences that apply to anyone. Particularly, they were singling out the Armenian genocide as an example, as a case study, but the psychology of it, or the medicine of it, and the medical aspect of it applies to anyone. And I think anyone who heard the presentation kind of, on some level, they could relate to something, some aspect of what was being spoken about. We did host, Southern California hosted the First Lady, Anna Hakopian, over the last three days. As Councilmember Garpetian listed, there were multiple events, including, and I think most importantly, the one in the city of Glendale at the Alex Theater. The reason I didn't go to City of Los Angeles event is because we were having our own event in the evening, so I figured we'd concentrate on our own. And it was a very well-organized event, largely due to our own Alex Theater, Glendale Arts, and our police department, and its very strong presence there, because it was a public meeting. The First Lady was meeting with the general public, and the public is very eager to ask her questions, meet with her, so therefore it was very important that things were very orderly, very well organized, which they were. So kudos to our police, kudos to our staff, kudos to Glendale Arts. I'm very glad that my colleagues got to meet Anna Hakopian. She's an extraordinary lady. She's very down to earth, and I tell you, nothing's changed since she's become First Lady. I've known her for years, given interviews to her newspaper since 2015, had the honor of being hosted at her house on a couple of occasions, and I think generally the Glendale public, at least the Armenian American section of it, can't wait for the Prime Minister to come and visit us. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And maybe we should dust off our greener Glendale plan. I know that everything we spoke about is something that perhaps should at least be addressed in that. It's been about 6 years, I think, that we've done it, and be a good idea to do that.
Absolutely.
Start a work session on that.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, that is our plan. As you know, we're in the process of a request for qualifications. That period has ended for a contract to help us put the entire sustainability efforts of the City of Glendale under one roof, to then help us provide to you a plan that includes a sustainability office as part of the budget, which we will be requesting for in the next couple of months. So that will be forthcoming.
Next item, please.
Next item is the community event announcements and 3-minute public comment portion.
I have some public comment cards. First is Tony Passarella. After Mr. Passarella will be Grant Clark.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff. Tony Passarella, longtime member of the City of Glendale. I think this is part number 9 or 10, I lose track. Lime issues another recall, this time for scooters that break in half. That doesn't sound very good. So we got a few examples here of these cheaply made, mass-made Chinese electric scooters. Is there more slides, Arnie? First scooters that set on fire, now scooters that break in half. The electric scooter company, Lime, issued a global recall of one of the models after finding that the scooters could easily break apart during use, according to a Washington Post report. Lime told the Washington Post on Friday that it was looking into reports that scooters manufactured by Oki, the manufacturer Lime blames for this particular malfunction, which the Washington Post was unable to reach, may break, and is working cooperatively with the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission and the relevant authorities internationally to get to the bottom of this. So not only do they catch on fire, they've been recalled, but they break in half, and the stem breaks, the brakes fail, the wheel falls off. So Mayor, this is what you want to put on the streets of Glendale, because I think you're pushing this pretty hard, and Mayor Sinanian, the rest I think are, at least thinking about it. Mr. Garpetian hates the idea. So how's this going to look after these 9 or 10 presentations that I made that make a pretty good case, you'd have to say, against the scooters? With the potholes, cracks, fissures this wide that former Mayor Sinanian said was going to get fixed. Well, I'm driving around the streets in Glendale all day, every day, and I don't see any repairs made on these potholes or these fissures in the streets. So we're going to put these scooters on streets that are problematic and that break in half, that burn, and are being recalled by the manufacturer. I mean, does that make any sense to anybody? And how is this going to look to the public that's been listening to this for my 9 or 10 presentations when you vote yes on this? I don't think you can make a good enough case for this. I mean, we got the bus The bus, that sounds like a better idea, even though it's going to clog the streets. You know, that's going to move people around. So I don't know, just consider this carefully, please.
Thank you,
Thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Sirilla. Grant Clark?
Good evening, Mayor Sinanian, or Mayor Najarian, and council members. My name is Grant Clark. I'm the boys soccer coach at Crescenta Valley High School. Over the last 10 years that I've been coaching soccer, we've been dealing with a 10-foot fence. Our field is directly north and uphill from the 210 freeway. With the help of former Mayor Sinanian, Glendale City Manager Yasmin Beers, and Assistant City Manager Rubik Gulanian, I'm pleased to report that we have a fence that is now 30 feet high and will keep the 4 to 6 soccer balls that were ending up on the freeway on our side of the fence during our athletic competitions. So from the boys and girls varsity soccer teams from Crescenta Valley High School, thank you very much to the council and former Mayor Sinanian for all your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Coach. Thanks for...
Did we annex La Crescenta, or did I miss that?
CV High School.
No, sir, we did not, but Mayor Sinanian and I, and as you know, Mayor Najarian, when we have meetings with the school district, there are items that come up in terms of shared issues, and so we shared the information with the school district, and I have to say...
Persistently for
yes,
2.5 years.
Yes. Dr.
The
King...
balls were going on the freeways?
Yes. Dr. King moved on it rather quickly, to her credit.
Okay, well, thank you to Mayor Sinanian and staff for solving that problem.
Thank you, Mayor.
I have no other cards. This portion of community announcements and public comment are closed. Let's move to the next item, please.
Under action items, 8A is Director of Community Development regarding consideration of a resolution of intention to disestablish the Adams Square Business Improvement District and all of its activities. A1 is a resolution of intention to disestablish all activities and assessments within the Adams Square Business Improvement District.
Ms. Beers.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council will go directly to Philip Lansomfame, Director of Community Development.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, for several years, the city supported a business improvement district in Adams Square. Maybe 8 or 9 years ago, when redevelopment agency started to be dissolved, the funding for that went away, and so too did the interest. For many years, the City Council had just suspended the activities of the BID in the hope that somebody would come forward and lead that group again. It has been several years, and so at this point, nobody has indicated interest. We've asked, and so we'd like to start the process to disestablish the Business Improvement District. If, again, there is interest, we'll go through that formation process anew and with a fresh look. This is the first of about 4 meetings that have to take place to actually unwind all that, and this is setting a public meeting. If there's more detail, Jackie Bartlow and Savannah Spicer are here.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from staff? Is there for staff?
Mr. Mayor, we got the heads up on this last year. We were kind of put on notice that unless something changes, this is coming down. So.
Okay, is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor, one quick
Yes,
question.
Mr. Carpet.
Do the business owners know in that
Yes.
area that this is being dissolved?
Yes.
And they're okay with it?
Yes.
Because we don't want to dissolve it and then you have 30 people here tomorrow saying, how dare you?
No, we have asked every year, and Mr. Sinanian is correct. In fact, it needled me a little bit as to why we were continuing on. Because it's been continued that no, they just prefer to do their business and not have the activities of a business improvement district.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, so is there a motion?
I'll move the item.
At 8A1? Motion and a second by Mr. Agajanian. Roll call, please.
Council members Agajanian,
Yes.
Devine,
Yes.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item, please.
Next item at 8B is Director of Community Development regarding Glendale Burbank Regional Streetcar Feasibility Study Progress Update. B1 is a motion to note and file status report.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, there's a method to the madness. Initially, we had Metro staff here to give you an update on the BRT and where we are to date with that process. We thought it'd be a good evening to also bring forward the Glendale Streetcar Feasibility Study and give you an update in terms of where we are with that study. For that, we're going to go directly to Mr. Calvert.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. As mentioned, we are here to give a progress update. In comparison, we're probably a little bit further behind than where the Metro BRT is right now in terms of our study. Not quite as far along, but we wanted to bring along some information regarding the route alternatives, just some background, some of the next steps as part of this study. No critical decision points tonight, no action item necessarily, just here to provide information to answer any questions that the council may have. So as mentioned, we wanted to give an overview of the scope of the work of this streetcar feasibility study, two of the route alternatives that have emerged from this, the impacts, the potential impacts that could be associated with the streets, and then the next steps in terms of evaluating those alternatives. The objective of this project to create a modern, highly visible, and efficient streetcar route that will serve as a high-capacity transit corridor linking the Glendale Transportation Center with downtown and its adjacent neighborhoods and business districts, and ultimately a future connection to Burbank. This is essentially the overarching mission statement of this project, pulled directly from our RFP and what the goal is of the streetcar. The scope of the study essentially is two phases. The first phase is to connect the transit center to downtown Glendale. As part of this work, we wanted to determine the need of the streetcar, so we conducted a existing conditions study, essentially measuring the population density, economic activity in the area to justify the need for the streetcar, which was there. This will also include creating and testing route concepts, two of which we'll begin discussing this evening. Analyzing the ridership potential, the accessibility, and the cost and impacts of those routes. That will be the next step of the project, of the feasibility study, to coordinate with other projects, as we heard from earlier this evening, the Metro BRT, and there are several other projects that we need to work with to discover overlaps or ways that we can integrate more gracefully with those projects, and ultimately to develop an implementation plan. This project would ultimately have a phase 2, and that would be connecting the streetcar from Glen Oaks to Burbank, but that is not part of this funding package here, what we're working on right now. That's ultimately a larger vision, larger goal of the streetcar. So it's just some streetcar basics. Many of these you're probably familiar with, but just to give a little bit of context, tracks are embedded in the pavement. These run with the traffic lanes, with the existing traffic lanes out there. They're electrically powered. That can be through overhead wires or with batteries. As mentioned, they can operate in the travel lanes, and they're ADA compliant. As you can see in this example from the Atlanta streetcar, the raised platform and the low floor allows users with mobility challenges to be able to use the streetcar as well. Some of the station elements, as mentioned, a level boarding platform. They can also include shelters with seating. Many of these elements you heard as part of the BRT presentation earlier as well. Guardrails and warning strips, signage to indicate arrivals and departures of trains, trash receptacles, and others. There are other elements that can also be enhanced to make that environment a little more usable, a little more friendly for users, such as fare collection boxes. Public art can be incorporated as well, and vegetation. Again, another example from the Atlanta streetcar. So this was our study area, and these lines and dots that you see on the map are a number of different routes and potential station locations that were being considered. You can see lines that go along Central, Brand Boulevard, connecting across Colorado or Lomita, several other streets. And this is ultimately going to be narrowed down to two preliminary alternatives. This red line represents essentially a north-south split. What we have for tonight is the portion south that goes from Lomita to the transit center would actually, it presents the same alternative. Northbound is where we would have two different alternatives and how that route would run. So the first, or for that southern portion, this was defined as potentially the best alternative to move towards downtown Glendale. With Tropico and the emerging transit-oriented development that's there, this allows this to run through the heart of it rather than the lower density uses and auto dealers that we find along Brand Boulevard, the southern portion of it. This was deemed as probably the best opportunity to increase ridership. So you can see that coming from the transit center to Lomita. Earlier we looked at an option that would go to Colorado as well. Lomita actually was seen as probably the least amount of impacts on adjacent properties, also with existing traffic as well. So you'd see stations every 4 or 5 blocks. The northbound tracks would be on the right lane. The southbound tracks would be on the other side, curb facing the far right lane. The existing parallel parking could remain. There'd be minor impacts to that parking for the streetcar platforms that would be needed, and we're not forecasting some significant traffic impacts along this segment of the route. But again, that's also something that we'll look into in greater depth in the next steps. The top image there is the existing condition.
Mr. Carpenter.
Quick question. I want to understand this. So from the Larizarian Transportation Center, and the route is to make a right on Lomita?
Correct.
And then?
And then that'll be the second portion that we'll cover in just a moment. We've essentially broken this between a north and a south side of it.
Thank you.
So you can see the existing section of the street there, and then what it could potentially look like with the streetcar. And you see those 2 streetcars, northbound and southbound, operating in the existing travel lanes. Parking remains, center turn lane remains. Those internal lanes also remain. So for the northern portion, this is where we start to connect to downtown. Essentially, we've identified 2 early alternatives. The first is what we're referring to as the loop. And this would take a train, or take the streetcar northbound along Central, and then crossing 134 and coming south on Brand.
Just a quick question. Back to the previous slide, with that second rendering, these tracks they're far apart. I know that we're really getting into the weeds and too early, but it's interesting. It's a concept. The tracks being far from each other and basically being in the middle of
traffic.
The traffic, yeah, in the middle of traffic, as opposed to next to each other at the edges of the traffic. In terms of implementations, in terms of construction and then exploitation, does that make it more expensive? Does it, because then you're grading 2 separate parts of the street, does it make the construction process longer and more expensive or not? Or do we not know?
It's probably a little too early to forecast on that. It's largely going to be the same. It's the same amount of rails that you're putting, the same amount of pavement that you're digging up. You could argue that potentially center lane might be a little less expensive. And we're also saying this is not the end-all be-all alternative. We're going to also look at center as well. And we'll see that as we look at the Brand Boulevard sections, that may be a viable option as well.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you.
So in this option, this takes the streetcar northbound along Central and then southbound along Brand. In each of these alternatives, we'll consider the advantages and disadvantages of them as well, but this essentially creates a loop. This was something that the Atlanta streetcar actually did. They did that because their right-of-way was too narrow to be able to put both north and south, or actually in that case, east and west in the same right-of-way, so they separated them. But some of the advantage to this would be the minimizing the impact on a single street. You're essentially spreading it out. Part of that challenge would be, and you can see by these red lines here, how that streetcar would move. It could create some issues in terms of how easy it is to use, how intuitive is it for users. A section example along a Central here, one of the impacts is modifying parking, or on Brand actually, that would be the case, is modifying the diagonal parking and turning that into parallel parking on the southbound side. That same impact wouldn't be experienced obviously on the Central side, though we do have bike lanes there that could need to be adjusted because of this. But essentially we could put this all in the existing right-of-way width. That's an important note to make. We don't need to expand the street. They would be operating in the existing travel lanes, and it would be recalibrating the width of lanes or how parking is distributed. So some of the advantages of that loop alternative that we mentioned is that it does minimize that disturbance on Brand. You're spreading that out. You're disturbing only one lane on Brand and then one in Central for this. So it minimizes that overall construction disturbance. It potentially could lead to less conflicts at the 134 ramps as well, since the trains are being spread onto 2 different streets. And it does support the urban development that's been growing on Central. There are new residents, new businesses there, and that's providing another mode of transportation. Some of the disadvantage to this is that it may be a little less intuitive for riders, and on the next slide we'll kind of explain why that would be. It is a less direct route. Essentially, instead of just going north-south bound on one, you've split that, and it essentially forms that loop. So depending on which direction you need to go, you would need to be on the appropriate street. So that may not be quite as intuitive. As we've heard from the Metro BRT earlier, there could be some interference along Central in that case as well, if that ends up being the preferred route for that. So that is something to consider, and that is something that we will be working with Metro with in terms of this ongoing study. What would those impacts be? How could we mitigate some of them as well? As mentioned before, this could come into conflict, or would likely come into conflict with the bike lanes that are on Central. And then there's also potentially the issue of diminished economic value. You've spread out those riders on two streets, so rather than concentrating that where most of the business is located on Brand and taking them to the doorsteps of those businesses, you've put them on two different streets. You could make the argument that you'd be catalyzing some of the businesses on Central as well because of that. So the idea of how intuitive this is, an example would be as if I were to be coming out of the Galleria and I would come out to Central where there is the northbound track, there would be potentially a platform or station here. But if I were to go back to the transit station, I would need to go to the Brand Boulevard, the southbound side. But for a new user, someone who's visiting from out of town, they may not know that. They're going to go to the closest transit center or transit station that they see, the closest platform. And if they were to do that, they would essentially have to go on this full loop and then head south. Instead, if you were on, in the case of Brand, you would have those platforms on one street. You would know clearly which way is north and south. That may not be as clear here. When I was working in Atlanta with the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, this was the route that they took, and this did pose some issues, even on smaller blocks, shorter blocks than what we have. In some cases, after that first experience, users tend to think it might be just a little bit easier to walk at that point because they were taken on that long ride. And that could create a negative impact, negative perception of the streetcar. Again, it's very early to tell. There are all those other elements that we need to look at as well, impacts on construction between the two streets. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind when we're looking at these alternatives. The second is coming across Lomita, and then both north and southbound tracks would be on Brand Boulevard. Same situation, four to five blocks, you would see a station. This would require converting the angled parking on both sides to parallel parking. We do know that that could potentially lead or would lead to a loss of parking spaces, but that's something to be studied in the next phase of this, the next steps that we're working on. And we would also look at how could we mitigate that as well. Are there opportunities to reclaim some of those parking spaces back? And as mentioned before, the traffic impacts would need to be, will be considered as well, and that is part of the next steps as well. Example section, very similar to the other one that you saw. In this case, you see the trains on both sides of Brand in this case, and it impacts parking on both sides. Obviously, things change as you move up and down Brand, so this is just one example condition. As we go deeper into the study, we would be looking at all the various different conditions that you would see. There's angle parking on both sides in some locations, only on one in others. So the advantages, this is the most direct and easy to understand route, as we mentioned. You were to come out right out of the door, you know exactly where those platforms are. You know where north and southbound are located. This really reinforces Brand's role as a multimodal corridor. It is a heavily used pedestrian street. It really directs those users from the streetcar to where the pedestrians are, where the businesses are as well. But some of the disadvantages are that there would be greater impacts to Brand. You would be constructing both the northbound and the southbound side on this street, so that would create a significant impact. The impacts to parking, understanding that some of those parking spaces would be lost as they're converted to parallel. And then there's greater opportunity for impacts to the 134 ramps because you're on both sides of Brand at that point. Another note on the parking, and something that I'll touch on in just a minute, is that this does give us a chance to analyze the existing widths of lanes, of parking, and whatnot. So we may not lose as much parking as anticipated, as we may be able to recalibrate lane widths, parking bay widths, or parking stall widths, looking at how we can incorporate bike lanes as well into this. And that's really in a project this significant is kind of that dig once philosophy. If we have a chance to take a look at this and what the width of those travel lanes are, we coordinate this with our pedestrian plan, our bike plan, is there an opportunity to integrate some of these elements as part of this as well? And to be able to claim some of that space for parking or, for bike lanes as we're kind of moving and shifting things around, creating room for the streetcar. As part of this work, we'll be doing a block-by-block analysis to see where we can incorporate some of those elements. We'll be coordinating that, as I mentioned, with the bicycle plan, the pedestrian plan, and trying to identify where we can make simultaneous improvements, especially when we're talking about brand, as we see that as a multimodal street. It's an opportunity for us to incorporate all of those elements. The next steps, we are going to look at the ridership potential of this route, or of both of those routes. And one thing to note is that those two alternatives are not set in stone. Those are not the ones that will forebode any other potential alternatives. It's a starting point for us, and that is what will allow us to analyze what the potential ridership could be, where the station locations could be, and then the economic benefit. Some of that may shift as we dig deeper into this, where we might understand if there are utilities that are in the way. Are there other streets that may be more conducive to cutting over to Brand from Central? Elements such as that. We will be studying the impacts of traffic and parking as well. As mentioned, converting that parking to parallel parking from angle parking would have impacts. There's also a maintenance facility that needs to be considered as well. Where are these train cars going to be stored? Where are they going to be washed? Where they're going to be maintained? As mentioned, we are coordinating with Metro and their BRT to discover where there could be overlaps, where we could come into conflict. How does this work with our existing B-line routes? And then looking at the LA Burbank Glendale study with the MetroLink Metro Rail corridor as well. After this, we would like to begin some outreach with alternatives, with these two alternatives, just talking more with the stakeholders, with the businesses along Brand and Central to gauge their feelings and their thoughts on these. But we wanted to bring this to council first to get any comments and feedback that you may have on these two alternatives. Otherwise, I'll...
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bradley. Questions and comments? Mr. Sinania.
Thank you, Bradley. Really, I was looking forward for this, to this report, and I mean, I don't know where to begin because it's not like there's anything in here that's set in stone or it's even a proposal to us. It's sort of the concepts being presented to us, and in the absence of the results of the feasibility study, it's kind of hard to push for one or the other. Am I misunderstanding this report in any way?
No, and we weren't necessarily looking for council to decide on either one of those.
Right.
There's a lot of work to still do, but we felt that it would be a good idea for us to bring these to you early on in case council had some comments and considerations as we go into that next phase of analysis.
And your report was great, and I'm very happy with it. I'm just wondering, didn't we hire a consultant to do the feasibility study? And
Right.
They're here.
And they're here to answer any questions as well.
Okay,
HNTV.
so I want to know where they're at, because how long has it been since we hired the consultant?
To give any updates. So yes, we did start last summer, and there was an existing conditions report that was conducted as well, and then the development of these two routes. And also working with BRT and the other projects that are out there in order for us to help develop these.
Okay.
I know it's not an exhaustive body of work at this point, but we were also waiting for some of this Metro BRT so that we could come out and do our engagement along with them, so that knowing that some of these routes could potentially overlap, that we don't create further confusion between the two projects.
Okay. So where is that report at? I mean,
The existing condition, we could provide that to council. Most of that was background information, demographic, to justify whether or not the area could support the streetcar.
I see.
But we could provide that to council.
How about the feasibility study? Where is that at?
That's what this whole body of work actually is. So when we complete the analysis of the ridership, the cost, the implementation plan, that would be the conclusion.
So when can we anticipate to have that, the entire body of analysis?
July, we will be coming back with the ridership, more exhaustive information on cost estimates as well. So.
Okay. I had to recuse myself on the vote with the contract to the consultant, but I can deliberate this, right? Okay, I just want to make sure. That's it for now. Just want to hear what
Okay, Ms. Devine?
My one question is, did you consider the nexus between this streetcar, the loop, and the Christmas trolley that we initiated a couple years, well, not last year, the year before, which did this loop. We had 10,000 travelers in 2 months, maybe less than 2 months. And there was, I don't recall anyone being confused as to which way to go, to catch the trolley to go around to get back to where they were. And there were people on the street that got on the trolley when I was on it that were from Africa, and they got on the trolley and rode down to the Americana. So this loop works beautifully for the residents here in Glendale. And even visitors, I'm sure. But I don't know why visitors would, well, I guess to do short distances. But anyway, I see a nexus there between the two, the trolley and the streetcar in this loop. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to understand this one more time. So coming down from the transportation center to Central and turn right on Lomita, get on Brand and come up? Is that what this route is?
On the alternative two, correct, the bi-directional route.
Okay, on alternative one, the loop that you're showing, I see Americana, then a few blocks down, I don't know what street is that going down south on Brand, you make a right. Which street is that you make a right on? Is it Lomita again?
In the loop, it would continue all the way up Central, cross 134, then come back down Brand, and then cut down on Lomita, where it would be bi-directional again.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. So when you come down on Brand, you make a right on Lomita, get on Central again, and go down. So also on this alternative one, the sections that you're showing, as Councilmember Sinanian mentioned, is two tracks being far apart. I think one thing we need to consider is the stations. How are they going to be stationed? How do we get on and get off this light rail? And also on the loop, this is just an idea. Maybe it's part of the study we want to do. When people get off when they come to Glendale, we have about 50 to 70,000 people who come to Glendale to work every day. So from train station, maybe this is another reverse the direction. They go up Brand. You can connect the business district to the transportation center to the business district, going north on Brand and turning down on Central and coming down on Central. I think in the morning when people come to work, if that distance is shorter for them to get to the businesses, I think this is an alternative that we need to take a look at. And as far as the Metro BRT goes, I think this project is very important to all of us and has a first priority to all of us. And as far as the BRT goes, we want to cooperate with them, and I think we can have both and have our cake and eat it too. But I think this cannot wait to try to coordinate with them in every step, because it's going to delay this thing. Metro has tons of projects, and this may not be one of their priorities, or it'd be number 10 on their priority list. So I want to ask everyone to just please concentrate on this project, push it as hard as you can. I think they can work around our schedule as well, and they were very prepared to that. And one thing I want to mention is this is a great presentation. The one thing I want to mention is this. I don't know where this was, in Atlanta, you said, this picture over here?
Correct.
Yeah. And Metro's presentation is this very nice, sexy, glamorous bus that looks like a light rail with the bus stop that is really gorgeous. I think part of this can be incorporated in some of our presentations to give it a little bit more boost. So with that, I'm very excited. I can't wait for this item to come back, so we can maybe part of the Metro funding for BRT can be diverted into this project. If they stop on the freeway, it just cuts down the cost of the Glendale side, and maybe we can use some of that funding for this project. I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully, they can help us a lot more than what they did before. So,
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, at the end of the day, if all the worlds were to align with the BRT and the streetcar, it would be something of that nature where we could have the freeway access and that alternative, if that did work with the BRT, and then the streetcar portion would be that connectivity here within Glendale and the transportation center and up Central and or Brand onto Glen Oaks at some point. At the end of the day, as important as this item is and as much work that staff and the consultant have done, and we will continue to move forward, we have to talk about the funding and continue to look for funding sources, as Councilmember Garpetian also mentioned, because it is a very, very expensive project. It's approximately $5 to $28 million per mile to build such a streetcar, and that's something that we're aware of. That's something that we continue to look for in terms of grants and opportunities that may be out there for us to forge ahead.
How many miles is this going to be altogether if it's a loop?
4.5.
Say 5 miles, so $150 million. Mr. Agajanian?
Any comments? So I guess my thoughts are, we used to have a streetcar running down the center median. That was our historic route. I'm not sure how they did that, how it was configured, whether it was 2 lanes, 2 tracks, bidirectional, or whether there was a loop at that time. I'm sure we can look into that. The downside is that you're going to, you'd have to remove those trees and also maybe bring riders to the center median, which might be a bit more dangerous. As we look at these configurations, are we assuming that when the streetcar is not on the tracks, that vehicles will be able to use those lanes of travel?
Correct.
Okay, kind of like what we see here, or San Francisco, or
Portland and Seattle. Atlantis does the same thing as well. And you're correct that it could run up the center median, and we're not eliminating that as an alternative. It's weighing the consideration of the changes to the parking or changing to essentially those street trees in the center. So
have we thought about, in terms of cost savings, keeping one main track but have sidings where the vehicles, in the event they are passing, one will come off on a siding and then return? Think of our Metrolink system, where many of it is single track and the trains pass each other by way of a siding. In other words, a short distance where there's a bi-directional track and they pass that way.
I'm going to defer
I'm not sure if
to Terry Nash from HNTB to answer that one.
Do you understand what I'm
Mr. Mayor,
getting at?
yes, I do. Yes, we can certainly look at it as part of the study. The consideration that comes to my mind is that you would need an exclusive right-of-way for that, because now you have a streetcar potentially operating in each direction, and so you couldn't run it with traffic at the same time. So that would be something we would look at, maybe in like the median of the roadway or something. Yeah.
Can you introduce yourself so that everyone?
Sorry, Terry Nash with HNTB, the consultant to the city for the streetcar study.
Okay, good. Nice to meet you. So in terms, my thoughts in terms of the alternative 1 or 2, I think they both make sense. And I think that's maybe the least of the important decisions on this. I think the biggest decision is funding. I mentioned last week that I've been aware that there are some Chinese companies interested in doing a P3. P3 model is the public-private partnership, where they would perhaps design, build, operate, and maintain it. In return, they would take the revenues, the fare box revenues, and maybe with some other money thrown in to compensate them for their investment. So what would make it important to them and successful for a P3 would be the greatest ridership. So I think we need to look at the greatest ridership models, whether it's from the train station north or clockwise or counterclockwise or or bidirectional, I think that may be one of the larger areas of focus to see what's going to get us the most ridership for our financial success, but as well as serving the public, making sure that we can get as many people onto that and off those damn scooters, which they would otherwise be riding.
Scooters ride on the same lane.
But the point is that this will be connecting to the train station, the Metrolink system, and again, hopefully to our BRT system and taking folks into the network and to Bob Hope Airport, et cetera. So let's, as this gets forward, let's look at focus on ridership potential. I think that's really what should be driving the decisions that we make on this.
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Yes.
So I want to echo what the mayor is saying, but also in any conversation with Glendale residents, anyone who knows anything about our desire to bring the streetcar back, the enthusiasm has not diminished at all. Our people love this idea. They can't wait. They're very excited about it. They really want it. I think it would really add a layer of sort of character to our downtown that would put us on a different level, really would. The only concern I've ever heard anyone express about this is the trees. People say, well, what are you going to do with the trees? And my answer is, folks, if we secure the funding, we'll figure out what to do with the trees. So it's, at the end of the day, it's all about the funding. And one of the ways to get the funding is to show economic vitality of the project and the ridership. That's it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Those remarks are right on. Any other comments from
I just
Ms.
want to
Devine?
say that just hearing Bradley's resume, more or less, that he's worked on projects like this in Atlanta, you say?
Correct.
And we're kind of lucky to have someone on
Absolutely.
board, on staff, that has that experience. So thank you.
Thank you.
He's an all-purpose player. He was
Yes,
he is.
designing our downtown specific plan last week, and now we're doing transportation, along with our transportation staff, Fred. And all his, Fred's being quiet today. I know he doesn't want to steal the thunder, and our consultant, and our director and assistant city manager and city manager. Good job, and let's keep working on this. Thank you. How did I forget? I used to sit next to him. He used to kick me when he needed some recognition. Now,
I'll move to note and file.
is there a second?
Second.
Okay. A roll, please.
Council members Agajanian?
Yes.
Devine?
Yes.
Garpetian?
Yes.
Sinanian?
Yes.
Mayor Najarian?
Yes. Next item, please.
Next item is oral communication. Discussion is limited time and is not a part of this agenda. A speaker is allowed 5 minutes. And council may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and city manager may refer the matter to the appropriate department for an investigation and report.
Thank you. First speaker is Dan Brotman. He will be followed by Philip Marks.
Good evening. Congratulations, Mayor Najarian, belatedly, but I wasn't here last week. I look forward to working with you. We've had our differences, but hey, that's water under the bridge. We've got a lot to do this year, so I'm looking forward to meeting up with you. I wanted to talk about the workshops that are going on this week on the IRP for Glendale Water and Power. Firstly, I want to thank Yasmin and Steve, I think maybe he's left, but for doing this. It should have happened earlier, but better late than never, and I think there's a good, robust process. I like that you've chosen Rocky Mountain Institute. I think they're a solid group. They're the ones that are facilitating, and I'm really looking forward to it. There are two main questions that we're going to have to be addressing after the retirement of Grayson Units 1 through 8. The first is how much new capacity we really need to ensure a reliable and stable grid in Glendale. And the second is how we're going to meet that need. What combination of clean or dirty energy is going to be needed. Let's focus on the first part of that, which is how much do we need. We've heard a lot from Glendale Water and Power already on this first question. And their position is that Glendale needs 250 megawatts of local resources to keep the grid stable, to meet reliability. The main point I want to make is that this is by no means a settled matter, that we need 250 megawatt. That number is still really open for discussion and debate. And by the way, just the other day, I and the Sierra Club people and Jim Caldwell had an excellent hour-and-a-half meeting with Steve and two of his people. So we're having this dialogue, and I think it's really healthy. It's much better than arguing over the transom. We're meeting and we're talking about this stuff. But the point I want to make is that this really is still not a settled matter. And there are three moving parts which could substantially impact that number, that 250 megawatt number, and I believe reduce it. The first has to do with this whole question of electric vehicles, which came up earlier. So we know there are going to be a lot more electric vehicles in Glendale. No doubt about it. The state is pushing. They want 5 million on the road by 2030 or something like that. More electric vehicles. There's going to be more electricity demand. The question is, will that demand be at our time of peak need? Or can we get that demand spread into other times of the day? And electric vehicle charging lends itself very nicely to using time of use rates and using demand response to get people to charge in the evening. I plug my car in when I get home, but there's a little timer. I can set it to midnight to charge at night, especially if I'm being charged a much higher utility rate during the day. I'm going to charge it at night. Most people will. Most people just need it there in the next morning. Or you could have systems in place, and other utilities do this, where if you have a system emergency, as maybe part of the deal, when I get my charging station installed, maybe I'm getting a rebate from GWP, and in exchange for that, I'm saying, when there's a system emergency, I allow you to throttle back my charging rate. And you do that over lots and lots of units, you can really have an impact, right? So the key is that we can have a lot more electric vehicles, but we can do things to keep it from hitting the peak. Now, I know GWP, in their model, they're using the CEC formulas, but that's not necessarily the only way to do it. So we're having that discussion, and I think that's really healthy. The other thing has to do with this N-1-1 question. As you know, GWP believes we need surplus capacity to meet the failure of our two largest resources. We believe this is not at all the case. N-1-1 is a real standard, but it applies to the balancing area, not to the metered subsystem like Glendale. So our responsibility is that we meet our fair share of LADWP balancing areas N-1-1. If we're 5% of the whole demand for power on that balancing area grid, we're responsible for 5% of LA's N-1-1. And that's what the BASA contract says, and it puts that number out as 86 megawatts. That's really what we need, not 125. And it's a complicated issue. We discussed it and debated it. We're not going to settle it here. I think that this is something that really needs a lot more study, and it needs to involve high-level discussions between this council and political leaders in LA to figure this out. Because I don't think it makes sense in a balancing area. The purpose of a balancing area is that you don't build all these redundant resources. We don't need to operate as an island. We're part of a grid with LA and with Burbank. And I've run out of time. I wanted to talk about one other thing, which is transmission, but we always have next week. We'll talk about transmission then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brockman. Philip Marks, followed by Amy Marks.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, and congratulations. And Council, Councilmember Sinanian, thank you for your service as mayor previously, and staff. I came to speak about the proposed project at 1633 South Victory, dubbed Victory Hotel. Tonight I'd like to focus on the issues surrounding our alleyway. Our alleyway is currently congested, and the proposed project brings a condition that will incur cumulative traffic into the alley. The more I've studied this issue, the more I've noticed how real it is. It's actually not a very complex issue. I know that you've worked with developers, you see a lot of big projects come here, and in the grand scope of developments, this is a relatively small, easy issue to solve. The applicant has chosen not to. He's dug his heels in and wants to hold to a 64-unit project because he's bound by a return on investment study. But I don't believe return on investment studies should design our city or should be what determines the public safety. When we compromise public safety, it can never be an investment. The solution is relatively easy. It requires only the removal of 4 to 8 units, and the displaced units could easily be put in the area where their proposed pool and deck is without increasing any height. Where the pool and deck is, it sits in the shade. It's also in our neighborhood area, which invades the peace of the neighborhood. We want our Labor Days, our Memorial Days, our Independence Days, our weekends to have the peace and serenity that we're used to in the Rancho. So we're asking City Council to order a redesign on the project that ensures public safety and neighborhood serenity. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy Marks. Amy Marks will be followed by Rakesh Patel.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, and staff. At the Design Review Board, among the public, on social media, and on the novictoryhotel.org website, our appeal participants speak about the many problems a hotel as proposed will bring: cumulative alley congestion, increased inconveniences for the residents and municipal service vehicle drivers, increased crime, such as drugs and prostitution, increased noise, increased public disturbances, increased police presence, and possibly increased costs to the city as a result. The developer has already brought conflicts with the neighborhood, and he hasn't even broken ground. Tonight, I'd like to talk about what the hotel will not bring. It's not going to bring any of the various services that the Rancho residents lack locally and need. For example, maybe an accountant, a florist, a dentist, jeweler, a new eatery, gift shop, maybe tech merchants, a specialty merchant. It won't bring any green open spaces consistent with the semi-rural nature of our Rancho, and it won't bring community meeting space for our neighbors. It will not bring any benefits for our local Benjamin Franklin Elementary School. And it certainly will not bring jobs, which Glendale residents could earn the living required to secure housing and other necessities in this city that's already struggling with housing costs. The applicant's team has informed that, has informed us that only 2 people will serve as employees for this hotel. 2 people to run a 64-unit so-called luxury hotel year-round, 24/7. Their 2-employee claim was made in response to questions about employee parking. The applicant stated that the proposed hotel will be run by the same operators of the Glen Capri Motel on San Fernando Road. The Glen Capri is a location infamous for frequent visits by the police. One GPD officer even stated to us that at one time it would have made sense to put a substation next to it. The conditions there were so bad some years back. As the same operators are expected to run this new hotel, it's reasonable to expect the same problems or possibly more given the greater number of units. And this offers the community no assurances of a reputable establishment. It leaves us feeling no confidence in the developers, given their empty promises and the recent displays of hostility toward the neighborhood. Had it not been for actions taken by our city attorney, the neighborhood would have continued to endure urban blight conditions, health hazards such as rats, mice, cockroach infestation, thousands upon thousands of breeding mosquitoes, and a feral cat population explosion. Currently, Mr. Garcia's office is still requiring cleanup of toxic wastes, which are even noted in the applicant's Phase 1 environmental report. Removal of code-violating structures posing a safety hazard to adjacent neighbors, and removing debris hidden from public view along our property line. When it came to meeting with local residents, the applicant has shown no respect for their deepest concerns, no willingness to compromise for the sake of public safety and maintaining the peaceful balance of our community. The Glendale Rancho is a valuable asset to the city. It's worthy of developments that don't compromise its preservation. So our appeal is a way for us to come to City Council to request your help. Please to tell the developer he can't have it all his way, that the lender doesn't determine how our city is designed. It shouldn't dictate how many hotel rooms local residents should suffer at the cost of public safety. We need you to do it, please, for your citizens, because to the developer, we're just a distraction and a delay for his merely for-profit development intentions. Thank you for listening to my comments this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Marks. The last speaker is Rakesh Patel.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. I just wanted to appreciate the time that you're taking this evening to this open forum. And it's come to our attention that some misleading information that's been proposed on the project at 1633 Victory Boulevard, which is the hotel development. We look forward to the review of the Council of the DRB's decision based on this project, and that the Council make a fair and unbiased decision. And for the record, we've had 4 different community outreach programs which we implemented the input from the community. Once we received all that input, we conveyed it and implemented these suggestions in the design. Once this design was complete, we actually had a review by the DRB and had a unanimous decision in which they voted in favor. Just for the record, we just feel like we were a little bit blindsided by this. Because of the outreach, because of the design review, and taking the actual input from the community, that this was the items that were already discussed were already implemented in the design. We feel that this appeal, that in your review you'll see the DRB's decision, and that you'll make the appropriate decision, based on the information provided by the DRB. And that this is a long-term asset to Glendale and the citizens of Glendale. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patel. I don't have any other cards. We'll close public comment and ask what our next item is, Mr. Clerk.
Any new business?
Calls for adjournment. Is there a second?
Second.
We are adjourned.